Welcome to the MindMill Podcast, where host Seth Marcus dissects and discusses all things impacting young adults. Peers, mentors, and professionals share intimate conversations on subjects such as entrepreneurship, exercise and health, music and art, the blessings and curses of technology, travel, and how to navigate adulthood in this age of information. We are the largest generation in history, and we dictate the future. The MindMill. Find your purpose, fuel your purpose.
Hey team, welcome back to the MindMill Podcast. As I introduce this episode, I am overcome with gratitude to you listeners and the whole MindMill community. So much is happening right now. The podcast is stronger than it's ever been, and I have so many great episodes in the hopper, just begging to be released. Don't get me wrong, I love and am proud of every MindMill episode, though I tend to judge the crap out of myself and how I conduct each interview. I've just never had so much opportunity coming my way. It can be overwhelming deciding what to seize and where to say no. Good problems to have, absolutely. The challenges of growth. Working on today's episode, I can't help but take a moment to reflect how far the show has come since its inception. Today's guest helped me get started. She gave me some crucial advice on what to do and, more importantly, not to do when starting a podcast. When starting any new project, it's easy to get overwhelmed by the challenges and the uncertainties. So a huge thank you to Lisa for her aid and encouragement in helping get the MindMill off the ground. Today we are with Lisa Dannen, Marketing Director for the National Cannabis Industry Association, otherwise known as NCIA. Lisa plays an integral part in advocating the cannabis industry to the public and to the government. Perception is everything, and in this crucial time in cannabis reform, Lisa harnesses the facts to keep fighting for the advancement of legalization. As we agree on in this episode, cannabis reform has evolved from a controversial state law to the champion and pacemaker for all alternative medicines and therapies. Without the stigma shift, inspired by cannabis legalization, acceptance of substances like CBD and psilocybin would never even be considered today. Lisa and I hadn't caught up in over a year when we met for this interview, and we had a lot to talk about. In this episode, we discuss how Lisa's early interest and compassion for the homeless inspired the trajectory of her career, how she harnesses facts and data to sway public opinion and government officials, and her predictions for the future of alternative medicines. I hope you enjoy this MindMill interview with Lisa Dannen. Lisa Dannen.
Hello, Seth.
How are you doing?
Good. Happy to be here.
This is a long time in the making. Not everybody knows this, but you were kind of like my podcasting coach in the beginning. I was just getting started and I was doing a little internship for a different podcast that you were working for, and you gave me the motherload of information on how to get it started and how to start marketing it. So thank you so much. I'm really happy to have you on the MindMill.
Of course. I kind of forgot about all of that, but yeah, that's true. It was like a year and a half ago or something.
We were kind of like in the thick of it together.
Yes.
Trying to figure it out.
Because I was just Googling everything myself, so.
But you had Googled it like a week or two before me.
Totally.
So you could like say it with a lot of confidence and bravado. Yes. You must do this.
And was investing somebody else's money, which also changes things.
Yeah.
You take a little bit more risk when it's not your money.
You can afford to make those mistakes when it's not coming out of your pocket.
Exactly. Yeah, that's true.
Dang, that was a year and a half ago. Mm-hmm. And since then, so much has changed. I was gearing up for traveling, and you were looking for more of a stable career path.
Yep.
And now I'm done traveling and you have a more stable career path.
Yep.
And we're here. I'm really happy to have you on the show.
Thanks.
I was thinking of like, okay, there's so many directions I could go with Lisa, but the last few meetings that we had for working on the other podcast together, you had an adorable puppy. Now you have a dog. I was just wondering, like, how's your pup doing?
He's good. He was actually almost going to be here tonight. He's home.
Really?
Yeah, he goes to work with me, Milo.
Okay.
Yeah, he's actually a year and a half old now too. But yeah, Cultivate was his first job that he ever went to, and now, yeah, he comes to work with me, and it's pretty fun. I don't actually think he likes it, honestly. I don't think he doesn't want to be in the car. I don't want to do the commute. He doesn't want to do the commute. So
he doesn't like the car, or does he
not
like the office?
He doesn't like to almost fly out the window every time I break, I think is the biggest thing.
Is he head out the window?
Yeah, he's like
all the
sits
time?
in the front seat, so I strap him in sometimes. Anyway, he's good. Yeah.
Good. We have a dog here at the house that has made unexpected guest appearances on other episodes, but I've never imagined that dog could hang in an office. And I think it takes kind of like a certain breed and a certain kind of trained dog just to hang out that long. You know, our dog would just start whining and want to go outside, want to play with everyone.
A sleepy dog, because his mom is a long-haired Chihuahua. And so apparently, and his dad is some sort of border collie or something, but apparently Chihuahuas just sleep for like 12 hours a day, which is the greatest gift ever, because it means that I have to force him out of the house to go to the bathroom, but he's not harassing me at 6 a.m. So he mostly sleeps. He's honestly not that well trained. I wish I had done that more, but he's a good dog. He's very spoiled.
Is he at least like affectionate with?
Oh God, he's so snuggly.
Does he do cycles around the office?
Yes. Oh, he snuggles everyone. Yeah.
Okay, so that's
he's
perfect.
like a therapy dog at the office, honestly.
Yeah.
We always know that when the CEO gets stressed out, he comes in and he just like grabs Milo and just puts his face in his stomach. And I'm like, that's right. That's like a good coping mechanism for stress. If you just had like a cute, snuggly puppy to snuggle every time you felt stressed out, I think the world would be a better place.
Absolutely. I grew up with cats. My parents had cats, and I don't have any problem with them. I do enjoy a good cat. My stance is like, I don't lean dogs over cats. I just like good animals. Yeah. And I have a serious distaste for bad animals, you know? But bad dogs are way more in your face than bad cats. Most bad cats will just run away or hiss and sprint off. But bad dogs will put their muddy paws over you or chew up everything you have, you know? I like that. I'm glad we went down that road. So tell me about your office. What do you do, Lisa?
So I direct marketing for the National Cannabis Industry Association. And so it was kind of a perfect segue from everything that I had done leading up to that point, which I could have, of course, never foreseen, but hindsight is 2020. I'm basically trying to change what people know, think, and do about cannabis as a drug, but then cannabis as like a social construct also, which is very cool because my background is in human rights law and housing rights. And I was trying to effectively try to change how people thought of homeless people for like 8 years. That's a very hard battle, actually much harder than changing people's stance on cannabis policy or just the social acceptance of drugs in general. It was good training, though, because they're both very controversial and they're both very sensitive. And if framed the right way, they can be very productive conversations, but oftentimes they're not framed right. I built the marketing department. They had never had one. So NCIA was founded in 2010, and they successfully had a communications department, but didn't really delve into the digital marketing sphere. So it was a really great kind of career transition. And I think it's so far my favorite thing that I've ever done in terms of like a career move. Yeah. And it feels bigger. You know, I'm not somebody who's ever had a job that I feel like doesn't have a purpose. So I feel like it's very cool to at least know at the end of the day, no matter what kinds of shit goes down, the bigger picture is very worthwhile in terms of reforming basically federal policy in regards to cannabis and hemp and hallucinogenics eventually.
That's what I was really curious about is I was in the cannabis industry pretty involved for 6 years and left it about 2.5 years ago now. Don't exactly miss it, but the reason I left was because I had a hard time finding a position and working with a company, especially these early companies where they don't have it quite honed in yet. It's just a new industry. So much is changing so fast. New states are opening up. So for you to find something that really grabbed you by the heartstrings and you have mission and purpose behind it, it's kind of a rarity right now. I'm hoping that since I've left the industry, more development has happened within the cannabis industry, especially as more states open up, hemp and CBD come to the forefront, and now we're on the verge of seeing a psychedelic revolution for therapeutic reasons. How do you feel the tides are turning? We are in the nucleus, being in Denver, and like when you say NCIA, I immediately know what that means, but for a lot of the listeners, this is a brand new concept. So many of the listeners may not even live in a state that's legal yet. So how do you see this cannabis landscape shifting in just the bit of time that you've been in?
I hope it's maturing because it needs to happen, but it's kind of going from the nascence of it being an industry that's largely run by people who are in it for a monetary reward. And I think that is the majority of people who got in right around the time that Denver legalized med and then rec. So I think the MO has always been money. And I think that there's systemic issues and also cultural issues with that kind of mentality if it's like widespread, which in this case it was. And so I think now is like it's survival of the fittest, where the small guys are kind of getting eaten up by the big guys, and it's just the corporatization basically of the industry. I think it'll evolve and mature to the point that it'll be more of a diverse group of people in terms of color, ethnicity, but also motive. That's one of the things that's always rubbed me the wrong way with the industry, specifically coming from human rights kind of world, is that the motive has always seemed insincere in the cannabis industry for as long as I've been in it, which is like 4 years-ish. I go to events sometimes and I think, these are not my people. And I think that because there's a sense of insincerity or a sense of a value rift when I meet a lot of people in the industry, where I was not part of SSDP. I was not a drug warrior. I was a warrior for another issue. And so there's definitely like this breaking in of people coming from different fields like myself into the industry that I think will kind of push it in a different direction. And hopefully it'll be more representative of kind of the business sector in general, as opposed to just this kind of this small population of people that's actually a pretty unique and maybe not on the same level as I feel like I am in terms of like priorities, morals, lifestyle, that kind of thing. So I think it's shifting quite a bit, but I still think it's tough. And it's very strange to find a position that you feel like is suited for you long-term in this industry. The industry feels very temporary right now. The turnover is insane.
It is very temporary right now. And I think that everyone in the industry, especially in Denver or the early days of California, there's a lot of like black market slowly going gray and eventually going white. But that's a very iffy area.
Yeah.
And it's something that it's kind of like this phrase, the pioneers get the arrows and the settlers get the land.
Yeah.
We're slowly starting to see that transition over. Yeah. One of the things I couldn't agree with you more as far as the networking events and stuff, because a lot of my roles involved lobbying and sales and consulting in the later years. And it was really difficult because I didn't align morally with a lot of the people that I was interacting with. To me, I'm speaking in a broad generalization. There's a lot of fantastic, hardworking people in the cannabis industry, and it's growing every day. And I'm obviously a huge proponent of legal cannabis and legal plants. But it felt like the guise of medical therapeutics and social justice that was kind of covering up the greed and want for intoxication.
Totally.
That was what really kind of rubbed me the wrong way with kind of the early medical industry. Thankfully, I think the hemp and the CBD world, now that it's really coming about and it's getting to the point where CBD is a hot term nationwide. People are familiar with what this means now, and nothing about the CBD is an intoxicant. And I think that that could be even more of the gateway to a more respected viewpoint on cannabis and on other plants, more so than the medical marijuana and the legal cannabis industry.
Yeah, especially since CBD is like the magic elixir of life. And I think as more and more people realize that it absolutely is, and it is more sustainable, and you're right, there's no ifs, ands, or buts about the use in terms of it not being an intoxicating substance. And so that might be more of the mainstream corridor that is lower hanging fruit in a lot of ways, because you don't have to circumvent all the stuff you have to with cannabis and THC and it being an intoxicant in some capacity. So I think that that's a very exciting thing. I think that it's still very interesting to me that CBD companies are having a hard time with packaging and putting hemp anywhere near on their products, or just the way that they're labeling things and packaging things is so specific. And the fact that they're still not allowed in like mainstream stores. Whole Foods sells like...
There's little back doors, from my understanding. There's little ways, if you get your labeling 110% correct, you might be able to get into a mainstream store.
Yeah.
I think it's CBD is the hot button. I think that hemp you can work with. If you label it as hemp hearts or hemp extracts, like that is somewhat passable. But as soon as you start getting into advertising for CBD, or I think anything that says cannabinoid, I believe, plus all of a sudden you're off the table. Yeah.
And the average bear has no idea what that is anyway. So it's almost not even necessary. But yeah, that whole world is definitely... That's the next ticket right now in terms of the health world. And I feel very strongly about CBD just because I've been taking Charlotte's Web hemp every day.
Really?
For a couple months, and it's a game changer. I'm taking a pretty high dosage.
Why did you start taking CBD?
I wanted to try it. I was just heard about it, wanted to try it, and I wouldn't say that I'm an anxious person, but I perseverate. I have the monkey mind. So to basically calm all of that and to try to just pacify.
So use it for mental benefit.
Totally. I'm still at the point where I can feel it kick in. I'm not that immune to it. My tolerance is not that high yet. The moment it kicks in, it's like this warm blanket, but it's just so pacifying. It feels almost like I'm floating, but very aware and very conscious and more patient, kinder. I'm a better person when I take CBD. And I honestly think that I'm not the only one, and I'm trying to dose my parents and successfully have. I'm shipping some back to Connecticut all the time. I do think it's the magic elixir for cravings, for diabetics, and for anxiety, for depression. I mean, and supposedly we have an entire digestive system that used to be ingesting hemp all the time as cavemen, and then we stopped, and then all of these other social and mental health issues started, which of course there's other things at play, but I can't help to also think that if there's something dietarily we're supposed to be getting that we're not getting anymore, then why not try it? It's expensive as fuck, is why not try it. I think that's like the biggest. It's prohibitively expensive, specifically Charlotte's Web, but once it becomes more mainstream, and it won't be.
It was one of the largest crops in America when America started. And now it's slowly creeping back in as some sort of like premier commodity that is elusive and partially legal. And I would love to get a scientist on the show to really dive into how CBD does work, because we're just learning so much about it every day.
Yeah.
But from my knowledge, I'm aware of this endocannabinoid system that's in our bodies that is built to receive molecules such as CBD and THC. So that doesn't just come about. There's not a receptor for just bananas.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like there's got to be a reason for this. And then that coupled with, I think the obvious benefits go in the epilepsy. You know, I think that has had the most significant impact. I didn't even think about coping with cravings or if it's diabetics, and it would have something to do with the blood sugar level and regulation.
It satiates sugar cravings, apparently.
I'm learning that today. Once again, we're in this area where we're blessed to be in a place where it is legal. We have an interested population. So you're not just learning it alone, kind of like a hidden browser on your computer so you don't get in any trouble. It's like you can have these types of conversations with people at the coffee shop. I was at one of my favorite coffee shops, I think yesterday morning, and there was a group of 7 elderly men that are there, you know, very regularly, that they do their coffee, and they were just talking about edibles and CBD. I almost wanted to sit down and be like, let me educate you real quick, but that wasn't my prerogative at the moment. I had to prepare for this podcast.
Yeah, of course. Of course.
2 days in advance.
Diligently.
Straight, pulled all-nighters for this one.
A+.
How's it going? How's it going so far?
It's going awesome.
I was nervous about this one. I want to rewind a little bit back, because you had mentioned you working with the homeless initiatives. Was that here in Colorado, or was that in another area?
So as a somewhat of a segue, albeit natural, I've been obsessed with homelessness since I was 5 years old, and I started working with the homeless population in college.
Why?
This is a very strange thing, but I am like a homebody. I'm a Taurus. I'm very much a homebody. I have always appreciated houses, the idea of them in physicality, but also the metaphorical meaning behind a house and a home. I lived outside New York City growing up, and my mom used to take us into the city because we had family there, and we would always pass these homeless people like in the subway stations. And I remember being appalled, very disturbed by it, but like starting when I was 3, that was my first memory of it. And I would interrogate my mom about it. How does this happen? How are people walking by them and not crying? Because I was always crying. Like I would see homeless people and cry. And my mom was like, yeah, this is not, for a 5-year-old, you're asking some questions that are probably bigger than...
It's heavy.
I was intimately focused on the fact that other people were not bothered by it, and that it existed. Actually, it persisted in the world that we were living in. And meanwhile, I had a beautiful upbringing and a beautiful family and everything. And I always felt like if there was one thing that would keep me up at night, it was that. So my first time working in a homeless shelter was in high school, although it was community service because I got arrested, which was probably also for the best, right?
There's a lot of different ways to arrive at the same
Exactly.
destination.
I would have done it anyway at some point, but the fact that I did it in high school when I was like 15 was a great entree, because I was like, holy shit, I thought I knew about this. I studied sociology and political science in college, worked at a women's and children's center in the Salvation Army in Pennsylvania, where I went to school. So I graduate college in 2009 into the recession. Oh, awesome. Great. Okay. Anyway, my first gig was I was a homeless outreach worker in the subway system in New York City. And I was like, oh, I know a lot about the world. What am I, 22 or something? And this was the greatest ass kicking of reality that could have ever been handed to me. So I did it for like a year and a half. So I was underground for 8 hours a day with a team of like 2 other people. They called me college girl because you didn't need a college degree to do this job. But we outreach with NYPD officers, and we were in abandoned subway tunnels and then also within all the corridors of Grand Central and Penn Station. So those were our two main hubs, which there are billions of tunnels and subway corridors that the average bear doesn't see going commuting to work. So our job was simply to see if they were dying and like actually transport them in a Dodge Sprinter, which I drove through the city from like Brooklyn all the way to like Long Island and everywhere in between with all the blind spots. So we would transport them wherever they would want to go. But the job was pointless. There was no effectivity at all. It was completely ineffective. And we were contracted by Metropolitan Transit Authority because in theory, these people were trespassing on their private property. I was working for a nonprofit called the Bowery Residents Committee, which is like one of the oldest nonprofits in New York City, in a humanitarian effort. But it was fucking worthless in terms of outcomes. However, it was so fucking interesting. I kept a really intense journal, which I actually found the other day and reread, because we would do these thorough biographical intakes with people and we'd find out why they were living in Grand Central Station. And the stories were unbelievable. They were... Most notably, this woman who I dedicated my master's thesis to because I studied housing rights and for my master's. This woman, Joanne, lived in Grand Central. She was living there for years, 5 to 7 years at least. Outreached her every day for almost 2 years. And she was sitting in the food court in a wheelchair. And this is disgusting and graphic, but true. Basically, her legs were rotting off. So what happens when you live outside, because humans aren't supposed to live outside, modern day humans, basically you get a wound, it gets infected, and you start to get gangrene, essentially. So she was sitting in a pool of her own blood and pus in the food court in Grand Central. God. The police were always harassing her, man, and I learned her whole story. She had kids who lived in Manhattan who must have seen her. I mean, if you're living in the city, you can't not go through Grand Central at some point. She had kids in the city. She was schizophrenic and she was from the city and everything. One day she just disappeared. And I asked the NYPD guy, like, hey, where's Joanne? No one knew. And I still don't know. I called the local hospitals and the jail and everything, but she disappeared. The recurring theme there was that the only difference between you, me, and somebody who's homeless is that you and I have some sort of stability, some sort of support network. It doesn't have to be financial. It could be interpersonal. It could be an emotional. There's somebody who, if you and I were like, I'm going to be homeless, they'd be like, no, you're going to sleep on my couch, right? Right. That's the only fucking difference. And so it really became about, these people don't have a community. How do you build community? You can't fucking pay for it. And that's one of the things that nonprofits always want to do. They want to throw money at it. Right. Oh, you need short-term housing. Maybe you do, but maybe you just need a relative who could be a mentor and give you housing, which would be way better. Anyway, so I did that. It nearly killed me. I was so depressed by it. And also living in the city was stressful as fuck. And
I'm sure.
And I was making like $40,000 a year, and I was living in Williamsburg, Brooklyn, right on Bedford Ave. And I remember at the end of the month, I had like $100 for food and whatever else it was. It was like my entire, it was stressful. So I bailed. I had a dream about being in Boulder. I like Googled a picture of Boulder and I bailed, and I had a one-way ticket in my bike, and that was it. And then I came out here, went to grad school. Then I started studying homeless women in Denver. And that was what I did my master's thesis on. So I interviewed and got to know like 12 homeless women over the course of a year, and worked at Colorado Coalition for the Homeless here in Denver in their communications public policy department, and Warren Village, which is another low-income housing program. And then into cannabis. How funny is that? And then I taught behavioral economics for a little while, which was that was very fun to low-income people, which was like the financial health, which is an interesting thing, just about how money stresses people out to the point it kills them.
Yeah, I mean, very real and very apparent at this time with living expenses just going higher and higher, and the separation of classes. It's quite foreboding as to where we're heading. It's continuing to get worse. And I wanted to know, what is the differences that you notice between New York City, which is one of obviously probably the largest homeless population in the country, to Denver? I mean, I know that in the last few years I've lived here in Denver, the homeless population has grown substantially. And I hear that it's the same in Boulder as well. I would imagine that's an example of what's happening all over the country. What have you noticed are like current trends that are happening from city to city?
So the largest homeless population is in LA, but New York is close behind. New York currently, not currently actually, a dated number is that they have 40,000 homeless people, which, by the way they get that number is homeless outreach workers like I did. We counted literally counted people we thought were homeless, which anyone who's ever seen a hipster in Brooklyn knows they could be homeless. They could just be a hipster. They smell like shit. You have no idea.
Right.
So you're just counting people, assuming that they're homeless, which is ridiculous. But anyway, that's where that number goes.
I had no idea that's how
it's
the
called
numbers are brought up.
Homeless count. It's kind of fucked up. Anyway, I did that in Denver too. Denver, as of a couple of years ago, had like 12,000 homeless people in the Denver metro area. They do a point in time where, once again, that's what it's called. They literally, in the middle of the night, will go out, because that's assuming that people are like, if you're outside at that point, or not in the middle of the night, but late at night, that you're homeless. You go around and you count people, which is kind of fucked up. It's kind of objectifying in a lot of ways. But it's also totally inaccurate from a scientific data perspective. And that's one of the hardest parts, is that there's not that much data around those true populations. But anyway, the biggest thing was I moved out here and I was like, where are all the black people?
Absolutely.
Which might be the name of my memoir. But I mean, seriously, so in New York City, the average black person was MB33 Micah, which was male, black, age 33, mentally ill, chemically addicted.
MB33 Micah,
yeah. And mentally ill, chemically
addicted. That's like their classification.
Exactly. So that when we would do
in this homeless count,
well, we would do an
database.
Intake. The database, but it was just like the average person that we were outreaching, which when we would do like an intake, a biographical intake. And that's kind of like, I believe it's anecdotal, but that is the way that most of my outreach workers in the organization I worked for, that was like kind of the average profile of a homeless person. And then in Colorado, Denver, it is white and much older. Like, I can only say from studying, what I was studying was that they were in the 50s range, and there's a lot of women, there's a lot of children, and it's a different kind of homelessness. So there's a lot of people who are kind of itinerant, kind of floating about the Midwest, Kansas to Colorado to Utah, Washington, wherever it might be, kind of all over based on work, based on whatever work can be found. It's kind of like a Dust Bowl situation, honestly, as opposed to the East Coast. And historically, this makes sense because after post-abolition, most of the freed slaves went to the coasts, and they went to the East Coast heavily, where there was a lot of population already. So it's all reflective of history in a lot of ways. And so the East Coast is still slavery and racial discrimination, but also just bias, whatever it may be, is still somehow prevalent in the way that the homeless population pans out, which is honestly what I found about homelessness in general. It's because I studied homelessness. I lived in Italy for a couple of years, and I worked with the homeless gypsy population there. And I was in New Zealand working with the population there. And it typically is whatever kind of subjugated population within a certain demographic is your homeless demographic, which is interesting. So in Italy, in Bologna, where I was living, it was the Muslim population. They literally lived on the periphery of the city. If something went wrong and they became homeless, it was very uncommon to find like an Italian homeless person, because they have a strong support system and everything.
It's very interesting that that's what you brought up is the main difference between the homeless and the non-homeless. Traveling through Europe, I went into the countries with this really jaded, in a lot of ways ignorant assumption that, oh, Europe, it's so diverse. There's so many different countries. There's not going to be any racism, but it's different. It's much deeper history. The Moors coming up from Africa, the gypsies in Spain, I guess the gypsies in Italy too. It makes a lot of sense, you know, on the other side of the Mediterranean.
Right.
There's a lot of lingering resentment from wars.
Absolutely.
Everything from wars in the 17th century to World War II. It's a much more intricate system there, but it's interesting. Did you notice anything different in how the EU is handling the homeless issues as opposed to America?
Yeah, they have a lot more, not like rent-controlled housing, but subsidized housing. There are communities in Europe that claim to have no homeless people, and it's arguably true that they don't. Sweden does a really good job. A lot of the Nordic countries do a really good job of just having like community housing, where it's like
just some amazing things.
You know,
Denmark
and
and Netherlands.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think Italy, and I can say this now as a citizen of the EU, is a intolerant country of diversity and of the otherness. But even they have socialized healthcare. They have more systems in place in general. They pay 80% of their income in taxes. So they have like a lot of social kind of networks built in. They have a lot of community support, family support. People in Italy, like if you're from a tiny town in Italy, you're probably not going that far. So there's more familial support.
Absolutely.
Americans we're so stratified, you know, like I live here. My parents live 3,000 miles away. My brother lives 3,000 miles away. So there's a lot more of that in the U.S. Our homelessness looks very differently. We also treat it very differently. There's a lot more empathy in the U.S. in a lot of ways, but there's also a lot more of a normalcy with it that I don't think that it would be the same in Europe or in the South Pacific, honestly.
It never came to air, and hopefully it will one of these days, but my videography partner and we were doing some work for the Westward, and we had an off project to work with Open Media downtown Denver, and we did a portrait of homelessness, and we spent an entire day bringing in people from the nearby shelter. I'm blanking on the name of it.
There's so many down there.
But we brought in a number of them, and we interviewed them and asked them very detailed questions about. I had worked a little bit doing mission work as a kid. I went to a Christian high school, so we did some service too, but it never felt that tangible to me. I hate saying it, but in deep honesty, I saw it as like, this is where I don't want to be. That's the lessons I took away from it. Help these less fortunate, and there's a long story to every single homeless person. But the takeaway for me as a high school kid was just don't end up that way.
Right.
You know, get a job and whatever. Doing this portrait series and getting a chance to have one-on-one conversations for 15 minutes with each one of these individuals was so enlightening as to what the real issues are that are happening. And what really stuck with me that I had no idea about was a lot of these homeless people are having most of their problems are stemming from them not being able to acquire a legitimate ID.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that, because without an ID, they can't get a job. And the reason you can't get an ID is because you don't have a stable address.
Right.
And I felt like that seems like very low-hanging fruit for a potential. There's no solution necessarily, but there's a series of actions that could be taken to really dramatically improve this growing problem.
Yeah.
And I was wondering if that has relevance to what your theory on it too.
Yeah, there's a lot of little things like that. You're like, well, that seems like really amenable. Like, what the fuck? And that's totally true. And a lot of times shelters will let them use their address or something. But a lot of times, even if you could get a license, would you get robbed? Would all your shit get stolen? The idea of belongings and what you carry with you as a homeless person is so tantamount to your existence. And I think if you don't have your license on you at all times, if you don't have identification on you at all times, it could disappear very quickly. And then you know how it is for us to go to the DMV. Could you imagine how it is for somebody who doesn't have access to fucking anything to go to the DMV?
And just to get to the DMV.
Just to get to the DMV, not to mention all the other things. Having documents. Where do you store your documents? Do you have an office?
Certificate, yeah.
You have an office with your shit in it. Where do you have all that shit? Like, when you do not have a house, your entire life is impossible. It's so interesting that it's kind of overlooked in a lot of ways. I think a lot of ways people assume like, okay, yeah, that must really suck. But I don't think until you attach all of those little things to like a bigger picture where it's like, oh, how do you get a job if you can't shower? How do you get a job if you can't afford new shoes? Those are little concrete things, but the abstract things that are harder to pinpoint are stigmatization of homelessness. So you become homeless and people stop talking to you. They stop making eye contact with you. They just assume
your motives.
Yes, exactly. Like you're an alien, you're a pariah. That alone is so disturbing and so unsettling and destructive to somebody's psyche that no wonder there's so much mental illness. There's a lot of mental illness in general, but if you have a tendency or if you are just somebody who doesn't have a lot of support, it will drive you insane to become that. And then you don't know who you are. There's that whole identity. The core of how all humans exist and how we function best is stripped away. And then to get out of it is the biggest hurdle, is to kind of somehow end the cyclical nature of things. I mean, there are little things and there are big things. I think taking a step back from it, the writing that I've been doing a lot of right now is all about the support systems and the stability that comes from other people, that people need other people and you can't pay for it. It's actually a hard, long solution. And we live in a culture that wants things quick, easy, and involving money. And that's not the way it's going to work for these things.
And that can be applied to damn near everything in the United States and everywhere around the world too.
Yes.
You really hit it on the head with the cyclical nature of the downward spiral. I mean, everything from your mental vision of yourself. And then when enough people treat you and tell you what you are, you begin to believe it. And it works both ways.
Yeah.
It's everything from, how you raise your children to fast forward 40 years, what people are saying to you when you're trying to just afford a meal. Or even if you're not looking for money, if you're really just looking for an opportunity, where does that come from? I really applaud that. And I didn't come into this podcast knowing, we spent a good amount of time when we were working together, but I didn't know that was such a deep passion, such a part of your history too. Yeah. So thanks so much for sharing that.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I did sell out, though. I will say that. All of that wondrous thing, which I still am personally very passionate about it. I'm getting into this program that's actually called Circles, and it's actually a program that does just that. It actually gives adults mentors, essentially, so that they can start to build a social network.
Interesting.
Which is really, and it's, I think, one of the
Is it targeted to the homeless?
Yeah, to low-income homeless people, anybody who wants the help, right? Which is like the basis of everything. Like, if you want to be helped, like, it should be out there. And the world is full of a good enough amount of people that would actually offer, it's like 5 hours a month. It's negligible in the long run. But the shitty part about that whole world is that the poverty mentality applies to the service providers as well. So in all the jobs that I worked with a master's degree, I knew I was capping out at like $42,000 a year.
Right.
And it was heart-wrenching, stomach turning work. And it was just like, not that it's all about financial motive, but you have to live. And I was, how could I be a 40-year-old making that amount of money?
Yeah, in that city.
In Denver, exactly. And how could I do all these other things I want to do? So this segue to cannabis was actually, I was kind of one of those people who saw some amount of money, but it was also interesting. I'm saving up to be able to do what I want to do long term is basically.
There's slight parallels as you tell your story. There's slight parallels that kind of become apparent between the cannabis issue and the homelessness, and most of it comes from, it's a much larger population than we can really conceive that is for the most part misunderstood.
Yeah, that's true.
The subculture that has surrounded cannabis and the underground has shaped culture since really the 20s, but it came into much more impact in the 60s.
Right.
And since then, it's been this kind of like, don't tell your parents, don't get caught. And it's kind of risen up this whole underground movement of art and of peaceful protest. And now we're at this point where it's like, okay, we kind of got what we really wanted, which was legalization. We wanted to be able to smoke our joint and not go to jail for it. But now it's like, now we need to live up to it. Now it's like, okay, you guys are grown-ups now act like grown-ups.
Yeah.
And that's where the cannabis industry is facing that now. It's like, it's time to grow up. It's time to be a big player. I feel like there's so much diversity and motive as to why people are entering the cannabis industry right now. But there will also be the idealists, the ones who are coming at it because they want to bring medicine to people in need. There's a ton of those people out there.
Yeah.
You do the marketing for one of the largest cannabis associations in the world. The largest in the world, yeah. And you personally have the role of delivering that type of message, not only delivering some sort of unification message from very diverse group of people in the industry, but delivering that to a lot of naysayers and a lot of people in doubt and a lot of people who are still products of the war on drugs. What do you see your main hurdles to that, and how are you taking stabs at fixing it?
I don't think it's been a super successful effort right now, but what we're starting to do is obviously at all of our trade shows now, we have like a social equity and inclusion panel. People are dying for that stuff. I think that there's an element of just trying to kind of lead the way in terms of that discussion a bit more, but also just trying to kind of make the environment a bit more professional in general. More of the corporate social responsibility, more of the things that normal corporations would have, that kind of dynamic, some sort of voluntary give back, donate your time, donate your energy kind of thing. We're not there yet. We haven't like hit critical mass. I think one of the biggest things we do with the naysayers is that we put out these white papers that are pretty much like, here's all the data that as to why you're wrong, which works really well. So we have a DC office, our lobbyists are in DC, where we can get them into our DC office and then they get spread around the hill. That helps a lot, and that helps their conversations a lot. I think accurate information, honestly, is the biggest thing. It's just getting data out there that's flies in the face of what people generally think, but it's definitely still interesting. We have an event in Salt Lake City, Utah next week. We have like 50 people signed up for, which is like, I never thought that would happen, but that's a good sign. Like
Utah finally turning around.
If we can do it in Utah, anything is possible. Utah went legal. They got medical in November. So Prop 2 passed. Yeah. That's a good sign. Things like that are hope inspiring, at least.
Absolutely. And it's baby steps. And the good news is that the industry is proving very lucrative.
Yeah, it is.
So despite certain people's motives for the wealth, there's power behind the money. And with the right unified front, we could see some real change and some real stigma shift in our lifetimes towards not just cannabis, but all the other substances, in my eyes, that are long overdue for being observed objectively rather than with this incredibly negative stigma.
Yeah.
Personally, I've been very interested in psychedelic research and how that's changing things. I was wondering, I wouldn't necessarily see that NCIA is actively pursuing those types of missions, but I'm sure there's probably a lot of parallels and a lot of like hand holding between the two parties to kind of like, we're kind of in this together, especially with CBD being kind of the new front runner, the new proof that there's other uses for these previously demonized substances.
Yeah, definitely. I think that that's true. I think we'll just kind of lay the foundation for any other future drug movements to kind of emulate in some capacity, and hopefully we can be helpful in that capacity. But psychedelics will probably have their own trade association if they don't already at some point soon.
They do. There's companies like MAPS that are pushing and gathering funding for, I believe at this point they're in phase 2 trials for MDMA and psilocybin research. It's just something that I've been listening to a lot of books and doing a lot of my own research, both like, reading the news and my own personal trialing.
Yeah.
But I'm just fascinated by the lightning speed of the therapy behind it. What can happen with not only the psychedelics, but also with cannabis, and how people are seeing such radical improvements to chronic pain or depression or any of these ailments when they're done correctly and with proper dosaging. And especially when people are doing them, full disclosure, with their doctors and with their medical teams, to be like, they don't have to hide that they're smoking weed anymore. They're talking about it openly, and the doctors are learning more about it, and the doctors are then in part thinking about it from a different perspective and maybe shedding light with new patients as to what other types of therapies are out there that happen to have been growing in the ground and may have been a part of our culture and our own evolution for so long.
Yeah.
So I want to ask you something about the marketing side of this whole project, because you obviously are a fantastic marketer and you're running a whole campaign, but it seems like marketing is everything right now. And there's a lot of smoke and mirrors.
It is.
There's a ton of bullshit out there. I'm so relieved to hear you say that, in Washington, D.C., when you guys bring this hard data, it's looked at and changes opinions.
Yeah.
Because in Denver, as somebody who has no desire to spend any time in Washington, D.C. right now, it seems like, well, how valuable is real data as opposed to just swaying public opinion with more inflammatory comments or flooding the media with a different story? So
this is applicable to marketing, but probably just in general, like humans. It almost doesn't matter what the data is. It matters like how it's framed, how it's delivered, and who's it going to. And that's kind of like everything has to be curated to suit whoever is receiving it in order for it to be effective in any capacity. So, for example, our lobbyists work closely with the Trump administration, and they try to talk to him about cannabis and every given possible chance, and his people and Kushner. The points that they harp on, obviously, are the financial benefits, right, and also the business, kind of like you're an entrepreneur, we're entrepreneurs, like kind of the business side of things. And then I think in general, that's pretty much it. I mean, the rest of the stuff is there. I know our lobbyists, and I know in general, like those conversations are not about the social justice, the social element of cannabis and legalization and justice in general. It's just focusing on what are the things that this guy values and how do I deliver them in a way that he can get it and agree with it. And that's pretty much fucking everything. I think that there is, unfortunately, the assumption that you can be everything to everyone, and that's just not the case. And ideally, you have actually a really niche audience. Like, that's really great. But I think a lot of people's ego want to be everything to everyone, and it just doesn't work well, and it's a lot of effort for not that much reward. So I think that that's the biggest thing, is just curating and softening, hardening, tweaking based on who you're talking to. But it works with people in general too, just in lay conversations. But that's all that marketing is, really. I think it's slimy in a lot of ways. I have a love-hate relationship with it, honestly. I find that it's a necessary thing to know about in 2019, and there's very interesting aspects of it. I love communicating to the public. I love writing. I do not like bullshit marketing sales tactics. But the cool thing is that in 2019, if you have all of the pieces that actually matter, like you have a company that is legitimate, that you actually care about, that you know other people care about, that you're doing something for the bigger macrocosmic world, you don't actually have to push it that hard. It'll sell itself in a lot of ways if you're speaking to the right people and you're focusing on speaking to the right people, and you're not just focusing on this like spray and pray kind of approach of just like, let's just be everyone to everything. And then also just being tactful. I think that there's a lot of people who do marketing that have really bad taste. It's like, yeah, you would create this poster because you have terrible taste. I see you skiing in jeans, like fuck you. And so I think there's like very basic things that I think are being tactful and tasteful and funny. I think that that's another thing that is lost a lot of times is like humor wins all. You can tell somebody that you're going to get divorced, but if you say it in a kind of a funny way, it's taken differently. And I think that there's an element of catching attention with humor, and also just that the world needs to be more comical because otherwise it's sad.
They need to stop taking themselves so seriously.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing too, is like no one likes people who take themselves seriously. That's the number one like off-putting thing about anybody. You go out on a date and you're like, this person thinks they're really fucking serious. They won't laugh at themselves. In marketing, it's the same thing. People don't want to sense that you won't laugh at yourself. So it's all that kind of personification of a brand or a company, like what shoes would you wear? Who would you hang out with? What bands would you go to? That's pretty much it in a nutshell, but it applies to interpersonal interactions too, in general.
Have you had much experience with perpetuating Lisa Dannen in marketing yourself? I mean,
no, I do not market myself at all.
See, I was hoping that wouldn't be your answer.
Yeah, I don't. So this is where...
It seems to be the new wave. Everyone with an Instagram account has a desire to create their own personal brand in some way or another.
I have my own brand. I just don't care if you know about it. Not you, but the general you. It's like I don't feel the need to like publicize my life and my existence to strangers. I think that's a personal thing that I just feel like, especially if I have to do it for work, I don't want to do it personally.
Yeah, it's like cutting hair all day and then going back and like your neighbors ask you to cut some hair.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It feels bullshitty too. It feels like viscerally like I firstly think that social media will fuck generations up for years to come. The kids who are even 4 or 5 years younger than us are so fucked. They like cannot have a conversation. They could not be doing this right now because like there's no screen. We're not like emojiing. We're okay with silence. These are skills that are like lost. The ability to articulate yourself, it's done with, once again, the motive is just like so shitty. You get endorphin from likes. Like you could run up a mountain and get some endorphins. You could go smile at a stranger. You could go smile at a homeless person. You could get endorphins that way. But it's such masturbation of your ego in a lot of ways that it flies against everything that I'm comfortable with. Actually, I've had bouts of feeling like, oh, I should do that. And I do it. And then immediately I'm like, oh, God, I can't. It's a soul suck. And then I'm like, oh, who looked my shit? And it doesn't actually matter. It seems so shallow, but so necessary. That's my debacle. If I could never sign on to Facebook ever again, because fuck you, Mark Zuckerberg, but also because I hate Facebook specifically, I would be so psyched. But of course, I have to be on there like 3 times a day, 4 times a day for work. So it's this love-hate relationship. I think my boundaries are that I'll do it for work if I don't do it personally, and that's fine. There's
part of what you just said that I agree with, and there's part of it that I disagree with. And I think that, yes, on my worst days, I feel that exact way. But Instagram and Facebook, they're like money. They just are what they are. It's humans that play into it. It's a reflection. It's a magnification of what's kind of like an underlying issue in society that is now magnified exponentially by the power of a global community and metric-driven happiness in a lot of ways, or at least people's association to metric-driven happiness. I'm sitting here and I love what I do. I love this podcast and I love what I'm working on. And we were talking before we went on air that I love creating the content and marketing it. It makes my skin crawl because I don't feel the same genuine expression when I'm trying to market what I'm doing. I feel that it speaks for itself. And I also, on the other side, I'm looking at my metrics and I'm like, my goal is to positively impact or to educate my listeners in some way or another and contribute what I've created and get it out there. And how does one do that without marketing, especially in this world? And I firmly believe that what I'm doing is altruistic and has use for tons of people, but producing that social media, it doesn't necessarily feel the same. It's like producing the content to market my content. Somewhere there's a rift in that. It's very frustrating. And I was hoping you would have some sort of Buddhist insight that you could depart on me that would make me feel better about the whole situation. But
sounds like we feel the same about it. I mean, the one thing I can say is that if you have a personal favorite platform, like if whatever it might be, say you have a website or a blog that you really like to keep up, whatever you like the most is going to be the most successful in terms of how you get this out into the world. And honestly, if you focused on 1 or 2 platforms and just did that, it would be better than like doing 30 different things and kind of dabbling.
Scratching the surface on every single one.
Exactly. I think podcasts are also challenging to market, which is what I found.
There's no yellow brick road for podcasting.
You need to write a book like Tim Ferriss.
I'm working on it.
Yeah.
I'm working on something. Facebook, I'm with you on that one. I think that it got out of control. It was kind of the first to really hit, and it's gone just so far beyond what we would ever have imagined. Instagram is just flooded with content, and there's so many poor players in that realm. But it also is, at this point, at least I believe, it's the absolute best way to get eyes on what you're promoting. Yeah. And YouTube would probably be right behind that. But there seems to be these at least somewhat shifting paths to success with Instagram or with YouTube specifically. Podcasting, there's no one centralized platform. Yeah. There's no real social media element to podcasting right now. As a content type, it's not the easiest to digest. Right. Because you have fans, you've got diehard fans. Yeah. But in order to win new fans, you need to not only convince somebody new to listen to a podcast and to commit 60 minutes of their time, their entire commuting time to listening to this, but also to choose your content over someone else's. You could watch 15 YouTube videos in an hour or listen to one podcast. It just seems like this new frontier that hasn't quite been honed in on, and the people who are winning are the ones who already have celebrity prowess. Yeah. The ones who already had the market and now are just talking about it. Not to say that those aren't some of my biggest influencers. Yeah. No one necessarily has the answer to how to go from 0 to 100. Right. So it's something that has been kind of my big goal for this year, is to find an alignment where I'm getting this to the people that I know it can help while not squandering the content in my mission. Yeah. If you get any insight, you shoot me a text or something. Yeah,
I'll let you know. A physical product is much easier, and I have a lot of ideas about that. But podcasts are just challenging in general. Audio is just kind of...
But they're great parallels. Yeah. When you have the product or when you have something else going there, it's a fantastic way to boost your own marketing. And I firmly believe in the 1,000 true fans principle, that if you get somebody that just loves what you're doing, they're going to market you in the best way, which is they're going to tell their group of friends at a dinner party that they love this podcast. Yeah. And that is the surefire marketing strategy that seems to be tried and true no matter how powerful Instagram or Google AdWords gets. Yeah,
word of mouth for sure. And then the product. I think people need something tangible to associate with something intangible like abstract. And I think the idea too is that the Tim Ferrisses of the world and Mark Marons, they had something established. They followed with a podcast as opposed to leading with a podcast. But I don't think that's necessarily how it has to work. But
there's the Pod Save America guys.
Yeah, true.
Who went the opposite route.
True.
Maybe I should look into what the hell they did.
Yeah.
Other than being really good at what they do.
Yeah. And I think that people want to know, who are you? Why should I listen to you? And giving people a response to that is tricky because...
means you got to market yourself.
Means you have to market yourself. It's all comes full circle. Full circle, dude. Oh, man. I wish I had a different news, but it's true. Yeah.
We went in a lot of different directions today.
We did.
I'm really, really stoked. I've been waiting a long time to do this interview, and I'm really glad we finally got in the same room and made it happen.
Yeah,
so thank you so
having
much.
Me.
Is there anything you'd like to share with the audience? Do you want to share your social handles? Do you want to promote anything that you're affiliated with right now?
I'm dabbling in a blog which is called Cyclical Nostalgia. That is just kind of their little personal anecdotes from strange moments in my life that I think are pretty entertaining, and apparently some of my friends do too. So that's just like a personal blog of something that I'm doing right now. But other than that, no, thanks for having me.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll put all the ways to get in touch with Lisa on the show notes.
Cool.
And Lisa Dannen, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Seth.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Hey everyone, thanks so much for listening to the MindMill Podcast. If you loved this episode, check out some of the other MindMill episodes. They're all free and available at themindmill.com, as well as all major podcasting platforms. Also, please take a moment to leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. It's incredibly easy and really is the best way to support the show. Stay tuned for more MindMill episodes coming down the line. I'll keep them interesting for you, I promise. Take it easy.